The sun sets, the moon rises, the dark reveals what the day disguises. Dual-faceted and steeped in lore, Lorwyn Eclipsed brought a decent number of new faces and filled in the history for others. Greetings all, and welcome back to the study. Today I'd like to examine the familiar faces that have been revealed in Lorwyn Eclipsed and revisit the heroes of old to discern what they're up to now. We've had a few weeks to spend with the set, and I found myself giddy to go player by player and follow the threads of what events led these heroes to where they are in the current plane state. As most of our lore updates come from the released episodic tales on the official website, I'll be referencing those pretty heavily. As such, I'll link each one below. Let's get started. Appearing in episode 2 of the magic story leading to the set's release, Brigid, the hero of Kinsbaile who assisted in releasing Lorwyn-Shadowmoor from the grasp of Queen Una, ushers the students of Strixhaven to a safer location, away from the prying eyes of the elves of Lys Alana. A scholarly note here, depending on which study you might be a part of, the following name is either pronounced Brigid, which is considered modern Irish, or Brigid, which is considered Old Irish. I have previously used Brigid, which is the Old Irish pronunciation. However, the episodes on the Magic the Gathering website actually indicate Brigid, which is New Irish. So moving forward, we're going to go with what they say. So we'll be using Brigid. Weathered and grizzled, the old woman eventually takes the students to Gold Meadow, a bastion of safety under the sun's protection. Unfortunately, Isilou descends upon the village, and the students are horrified to learn what happens to those who are ensnared in the grasp of darkness. Brigid hurriedly instructs the group on how to find Glen Elendra before rushing off, as a hero does, to save the Kithkin of Gold Meadow. As they run away from danger, Brigid is swallowed up by the moontide, her eyes glowing eerily and her actions shifting to match. Initially, Brigid indicates that she isn't affected by the change so much as others. Unfortunately, in the presence of Isilou, that doesn't seem to be the case. Later in the story, one of the students is caught by Lewin and is brought to Lys Ilana, taking audience with High Perfect Mercant herself. Of Brigid, she says, "You speak of Brigid, the hero of Kinsbaile, do you not? Kithkin are simple, uncultured folk, close to the land, concerned with their community, not with the needs of the wider world. She would only see what was before her, not its implications or the possibilities it presented." If that isn't exactly an elf thing to say, I don't know what is. Brigid must deal with the duality of herselves, struggling to be the hero they know her as. She continues to aid the students in later episodes, but her primary part is fairly early on. Normally, I like to do the deck teching at the end of the video after all of the lore is neatly wrapped up. However, we're going to switch that up for this one, purely because so much lore lives within the new cards. Now that we've experienced her part, let's examine her actual cards. Brigid, hero of Kinsbaile, her original card, shows a young and sprightly Brigid, archer supreme for her Clichan. She has first strike, and her abilities read that she can deal 2 damage to each attacking or blocking creature a target player controls. Her flavor text says, "Thanks to one champion archer, the true borders of Kinsbaile extend an arrow's flight beyond the buildings." In the Lorwyn Eclipsed card, Brigid Clichan's heart is older, wiser, and most assuredly just as deadly. A transformation card with the most excellent art, Brigid's Lorwyn side has whenever this creature enters or transforms into Brigid, Clichan's heart, create a 1/1 green and white Kithkin creature token. At the beginning of your first main phase, you may pay to transform her. Her transformed side, Brigid, Down's Mind, says that you can add mana, where X is the number of other creatures you control. You can also transform her back to her Clichan side. Pretty powerful, especially if you do Commander and you have her in the command zone. Brigid cares most about her people, and it shows in her card design. She creates new Kithkin for your board state with her Lorwyn side, and she gives you massive amounts of mana for those Kithkin with her Shadowmoor side. This new card is an absolute win, in my opinion. I love when games give characters the agency to age. So few titles actually allow beings to get older, and I think that often does a disservice not only to their character, but to our world at large. Aging is normal, natural, and all beings deserve honor, regardless of youth. Just as an aside, I did not pull the beautiful art that I use in this video, but the normal versions of the card are just as great. Of course, I'm already halfway through building a commander deck with Brigid at the helm. I've got to put that Kithkin Bully Rider I mentioned in the previous video to good use. While Sygg does not make an appearance in the episodes leading into Lorwyn Eclipsed, the legendary merfolk who helped slay Una did get new cards. Like Brigid, his cards have transformation abilities, keeping with the dual nature of the Eclipsed realms. His original cards were Sygg, River Guide, the Lorwyn version of him, and Sygg, River Cutthroat for Shadowmoor. The Sygg River Guide has Island Walk, which of course means that the creature can't be blocked as long as a defending player controls an island. He can also give protections from colors of your choice until the end of turn. His flavor text says, "If there's a place worth going, the marrow lanes already do. And if there's a route worth taking, yours truly already has." His Shadowmoor counterpart says that at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you get to draw a card. The flavor text there reads, "It is not a matter of deserving, it's a matter of strength. The power to hold versus the power to take." His new transformation cards, Sygg, Wanderwine Wisdom, and Sygg, Wanderbrine Shield, indicate. Sygg, Wanderwine Wisdom says that Sygg can't be blocked. Whenever this creature enters or transforms into Sygg, Wanderwine Wisdom, target creature gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, draw a card until end of turn. At the beginning of your first main phase, you can pay to transform him into Sygg, Wanderbrine Shield, which also says he can't be blocked. Whenever this creature transforms into Sygg, Wanderbrine Shield, target creature you control gains protection from each color until your next turn. At the beginning of your first main phase, you can transform him back. Sygg also got a kindred sorcery in Sygg's Command, which says that you get to choose two. You can create a token that's a copy of a target merfolk you control. Creatures target player controls gain lifelink until end of turn. Target player draws a card. Or you can tap a target creature and put a stun counter on it. This harkens back to Lorwyn's initial principles in the first set in 2007, kindred serving their kindred. I can appreciate that Sygg has a pretty valuable card in the set, and he didn't get left behind. Maralen was born of Una, and Una had been the rot at the root of Lorwyn-Shadowmoor's very heart. The death of the old fairy queen had been a gift to the world, given at great cost, and Maralen refused to allow herself to follow her creator's path into cruelty. Should she show any sign that her slow transformations had started to lead her down her creator's path, Rhys would kill her, pulling the dagger he kept drenched in moonglove extract from his belt and driving it through her heart. Maralen, the avatar of Great Mother Una herself, has been Queen of the Faerie for many years at the start of Lorwyn Eclipsed story, and the frayed threads are starting to show. Her scenes begin with nightmares and unending laughter that only Maralen can hear. As the students of Strixhaven make their way into Glen Elendra, Maralen is seen struggling with flowers from an unknown source, eerily familiar to the blooms and petals of Una. When speaking of her creation to the student Tamlin, Maralen says, "Did you think all lives began with a loving embrace and a family to welcome you? Mine began in Una's bower, petal-born and larval, distinct from the fairies around me in that I was half-finished, waiting to be put through my instars by Una herself. I was to be her avatar, a part of her, carrying her consciousness ahead of my own. She fed me nectar, royal jelly for a queen, and she plucked the wings from my shoulders when they began to form. She kept me as a weapon, not a child. She could see the restiveness spreading through the world, the cycle struggling to reassert itself, and I was meant to become her when the world inevitably rose against her. She made only 2 mistakes, my Maker Mother, and I was one of them. She made and molded me. and when the time was right, she slipped me into the shed skin of Maralen of the Mornsong, who had no more need of it. She made an elf of me to rule Lorwyn, and she didn't consider what the heart and hopes of an elf might do to her careful plans. She made me someone else when she married me to my mask. Maralen talks at length about a brother she no longer knew, someone who had gone missing long ago. This fairy also makes an appearance in the episodes. Spoiler alert ahead for those who haven't read the episodes. It's Oko. In that sense, I suppose we officially have a Lorwyn planeswalker. Anyway, everything is falling out of balance, not only with an omen path opening to Lorwyn, but also the fact that Isilu, carrier of darkness, is awake and moving through the land, while Erdu should be the only godlike being awake, yet it slumbers. In a series of events, Rhys nearly fulfills his promise of killing Maralen, the laughter pealing through her head an indication of something far worse than death. He accuses her of hiding the fact that she can hear that voice, the questionable fact that her rooms are full of Una's petals. In this moment, he actually attempts to strike her down, but slips on the petals and falls through a nearby window. Maralen takes this as a moment to escape both Rhys and Glen Elendra, seeking to settle Isilu back into slumber and restore the balance of Lorwyn-Shadowmoor, lest more terrible things happen. Throughout this precarious story, Maralen continues to be stalked by Rhys, who thoroughly believes she is turning into Una after all of these questionable events. He truly believes that his promise has come due, and he intends to honor his friend's wishes and greatest demand. Eventually, as she moves through the world with the students of Strixhaven and her old ally Ashling, she is caught by Rhys, and he raises his dagger, slicing into her with his poisoned blade. Her body leaked petals rather than blood. As battle waged around them, elves and Kithkin, both torn between light and dark, Oko swept in to save his sister. After one of the students had been forced to assist High Perfect Morcant in retrieving Dawnglove, she had created a tincture of Dawnglow, originally planning to kill Isilu with its power. The elf Luwin assisted in robbing Morcant of this vial, and Oko swiftly began to administer it to his sister. The cut on her arm still wept petals, but they were slowing, and in their place the wound began to leak a thick golden sap, laced with lines of bloody red. Oko looked at this and nodded, content, before he turned his attention to Rhys. Ultimately, Maralen did survive Rhys's attack, and as for the elf himself, well, we'll see in just a moment. First, let's take a look at all of Maralen's cards. The original card, Maralen of the Mornsong, has some pretty rough abilities. Players can't draw cards, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player loses 3 life, searches their library for a card, puts it into their hand, and then shuffles. Its flavor text says, Maralen sent Visa, Indri, and Ileona, the Vendilion clique, on the gravest of tasks. For players who aren't keen on losing their ability to draw cards, Maralen poses a huge threat, one that is perpetuated in Lorwyn Eclipsed. While her actual character card does not show this, a new enchantment named Mornsong's Aria keeps the original abilities intact. Maralen Fae Ascendant is the new character card for our elf fairy queen, stating that whenever Maralen or another elf or fairy you control enters, exile the top 2 cards of target opponent's library. Once each turn, you may cast a spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of elves and fairies you control from among cards exiled with Maralen this turn, without paying their mana cost. The Mornsong Aria flavor text states, Maralen is more forgiving than Una was, but her rule is no less absolute. And between the 2 new cards, that statement is absolutely correct. You are able to put out a staggering number of elves and fairies between all of the buffs throughout Magic the Gathering's history. So she can cast some pretty big stuff. Now, on to Rhys. Rhys was far older than any elf was meant to be, ancient by any standard of their once shared people. But, like her, he showed none of it on his face. Any who saw him would have thought him a hunter in his prime, if not for the silent warning provided by horns, which were larger and wider than they ever would have had time to grow under normal circumstances. He was her friend, her confidant, one of the only people who understood how much she had changed and how much she feared the changes yet to come. And should the need arise, her executioner. Rhys, an elf honor-bound by Maralen to stop the return of Una, did exactly what he thought was right. At one point in the tale, Maralen explains to one of the Strixhaven students, "Rhys is an elf." So? Elves live for a blink of an eye. They're here and they're gone before they have time to become anything less than perfect. Rhys is older than any elf I've ever heard of because he made a binding promise to me. As long as he's bound to me, my magic keeps him alive. It seemed so unlikely that he would ever feel compelled to keep his word that it was better to let the promise stand and keep my friend. Much to her dismay, Rhys kept his word. After every sign of Una's return became apparent, Rhys stalked his friend through the plain, his singular focus on the promise he'd made so long ago. Once he had attacked Maralen and the poison began to slow her heart, the vow that had sealed them together began to break. His illusions had failed when the day replaced the night. His broken horns were clearly visible, the reminder of what he had paid to save the world, when heroism had been so much easier to see and understand, as straightforward as the season, as inevitable as the dawn. Oko nursed his sister back from the brink of death, and as she rose, alarms went off in her mind. She could no longer feel the invisible string that tied them together, and Maralen immediately urged Rhys to make a new vow. He stepped to her, embracing his friend tightly. Illuminated by the sun's warmth of air-dew, Rhys made his choice. "I'll be going now," he said, and the wind began to blow him away. His body came apart in flower petals, dawn glove and moon glove and apple blossom, each one leaving him a little paler and more faded than the last, until he was gone, and Erdu sat alone. A true friend to the end, Rhys the Redeemed became Rhys the Evermore, finally at rest. I'm sure you can hear the shake in my voice as I've attempted to read that quote. I cannot tell you how many tears I shed as this moment happened. It was beautiful. And as soon as the card for Rhys the Evermore was revealed, I clocked that it looked quite similar to that of Path to Exile. Sometimes it's tough being right. With a heavy heart, let's move on to the cards. Rhys's original card was Rhys the Exiled, that said whenever Rhys attacks, you gain 1 life for each elf you control. If you sacrifice an elf, you get to regenerate Rhys. His flavor text read, "Once a famed hunter and packmaster, now a renegade seeking his own path." Rhys later became Rhys the Redeemed, stating that he could create a 1/1 green and white elf creature token, and for each token you control, you could create a token that's a copy of that creature. His flavor text read, "Whole again and honor and horn." And finally, we have Rhys the Evermore. When Rhys enters, another target creature you control gains Persist until end of turn, which, for those unfamiliar, is when it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, you could return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter. You could also pay to remove any number of counters from a target creature you control. It's sorcery speed, so make sure you're aware. While his new card lacks the flavor text, it's obvious what his abilities are meant to represent. He sustains others, just as the vow to Maralen has sustained him. While Maralen lives after his promise is kept, he chooses his own end, the release his short elf life had long been denied. Her face was a mask of the same black glass as her body, crowned with a shock of blazing bonfire. More flames leaked out along the line of her throat and from the crease of her joints, making her look like a barely contained inferno. Ashling, a flamekin of great, albeit concerning renown, comes back into the spotlight during episode 5. Before assisting the others in taking down Queen Una, Ashling became infamous as the Extinguisher, a terrible force of Shadowmoor. After the fall of Una, Ashling walked the path of flames in order to reconcile the two halves of herself. In Lorwyn Eclipsed, Ashling joins the fray by assisting Maralen and the Strixhaven students as darkness encroaches all around them. She stays with the group until the very end of the tale, from traveling via boggart boat to the battle against Morcant and her elven armies, a constant source of light for her companions. She's one of the flamekin of Mount Tanafel, from which the Wanderrhine River springs. We've been enemies as often as we've been friends, and she knows what it is to have her people assume that you're a villain even when you're not. The only reason I don't see her more often in Glen Elendra is that she thinks me a fool for keeping Rhys so close when his purpose is to end me. If anyone knows anything of your friends or the path that brought you here, it's Ashling. She runs the length of the river and back again, carrying stories and secrets to the mountain. The pilgrim's path, once walked, is not so easily set aside. Card-wise, Ashling has quite a few variations to contend with. More so, in fact, than any other Lorwyn-Shadowmoor hero, as far as I'm aware. She got releases in Modern Horizons 3, and she has numerous cards to go through. When looking her cards up on Gatherer, you have Ashling the Pilgrim, Ashling's Command, Ashling's Prerogative, Ashling's Flame Dancer, Ashling Rekindled, Ashling Rhymebound, Ashling the Extinguisher, Ashling the Limitless, and I think that's it. Her newest cards, Ashling Rekindled and Ashling Rhymebound, indicate that whenever this creature enters or transforms into Ashling Rekindled, you may discard a card. If you do, you get to draw a card. And of course, at the beginning of your main phase, you may pay to transform Ashling into her opposite side, Ashling Rhymebound. Whenever this creature transforms into Ashling Rhymebound, and at the beginning of your first main phase, you can add 2 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to cast spells with mana value 4 or greater. And of course, you can transform her back. Ashling also has Ashling the Limitless, which says, elemental permanent spells you cast from your hand gain evoke 4 as you cast them. Whenever you sacrifice a non-token elemental, you can create a token copy of it. The token gains haste until end of turn. And at the beginning of your next end step, sacrifice it unless you pay Wooburg. Again, she has quite a few cards. Ashling has come a long way through the lore of Lorwyn-Shadowmoor. There are a few people that tend to pop up in just as many places as Ashling does. At the end of her episodes, and after dealing with the battle with Morcant, she says, "The battle ends, the morning comes, the morn song will be sung again." Unfortunately, the only hero who stood against the tide of Una that does not return is Kolfinor, whose body was destroyed in that fight. Since you tree folk are a rarity, there was only one other sapling, which was also destroyed. Luckily for us, a cutting was saved from this sproutling, and Rhys enabled the cultivation of Faerie, young yew, the last of her kind. This is the one that shows up in Lorwyn Eclipsed. The elder tree folk who tended her lost their lives in saving her from cruel faerie, and as such, she grew up without a loving hand. Faerie is cruel and unyielding in Shadowmoor, using the great magic sown from her rising to unleash terror. In Lorwyn, she matches the kindness and benevolence of her forebears. And there you have it. The old heroes of Lorwyn-Shadowmoor and their tenured journeys through the plane and history. I, for one, really appreciate the continued support for these characters, as I think too many games tend to use characters as throwaways and rarely think of how they might have actually lived their lives in the time between. I think most of these cards are pretty good upgrades and pretty good continuations. I'm not mad about any of them. I do want to point out the low number of legendary creatures that comes in Lorwyn Eclipsed. Many people have actually found it refreshing that there are only, I believe it's 23. And of course, these heroes take up a couple of those releases. I tend to be a significant commander player, so I'm always looking for new commanders. And unlike some previous releases, even though I've loved them, the number of different builds was kind of staggering. So yeah, I appreciate the way that they've done this set. As always, thank you guys for joining me in the study, and I'll see you next time, deep in the house of lore.